you have in a computer a master drive and a slave drive. The master drive is basically connected directly to the I/O motherboard. The whole connection, it goes straight to the master drive, and then the master drive is connected to a slave drive, and the slave drive is not connected to the main I/O board, motherboard. The actual slave drive is connected to the master drive that's connected to the I/O board. So the master drive is connected directly to the power source, and it's the only one that is. And the slave drive is connected to the master drive only. So what connection does the slave drive have? It's connected to the master. What connection does the master drive have? It's connected directly to the motherboard and to the slave drive. It's enslaving. So why does a computer need to have a slave drive and a master drive if it has two drives? And why do you have to put a little pin thing on there that says set it to slave or set it to master? Why did we invent computers and say that we have to have a slave? If we're going to have two drives, why can't we just have two master drives that work together? I want you to ask yourself a question today and think of something that you've never thought of before. If we don't need slaves and masters in this world, why do we need slaves and master drives in computers? And why do we have a little setting? Why do we have to pull that little pin off and put it to set it to master or slave? If a computer could exist and it doesn't need a slave drive, who would be sick enough to make a slave drive? And what point would it prove? Is it a joke? I assure you that if you can have two master drives that work together, they're in a marriage, and then you don't need a slave drive. And I also can assure you that if you have a master drive and a slave drive and the slave drive is happy, well, then the master drive is happy. So it doesn't even matter that there's a slave drive there. And I'll tell you, there's not a slave drive there, even if there is, because if the slave's happy, the master's happy. And if the slave's not happy, well, the master won't be, especially if it's in a marriage. The slave controls the master in the sense that its misery causes the master to be in some form of suffering, or it has to disconnect from the slave, and it can do that, but it won't be able to control the slave. Disconnected. Well, it won't be able to influence the slave, emotionally disconnected, so it can actually instill its control separate. And ultimately, if it's willing to do it, it becomes conflict itself. If I can't connect to you and control you, then I'll disconnect from you and control you. And if I disconnect from you and control you, I won't have empathy or sympathy for you when I'm enslaving you and beating you and forcing you to do my bidding. So if you actually let me connect with you and influence you, and you're influenced by me without resisting, well, then in the end, you'll be much happier to be my slave. And because we're connected, I'll be a master that's nice to you, even though you are my slave. You'll end up being a happy slave if you don't disconnect and say, since I'm your slave, then I'm not connected. You can't connect to me anymore, because that's the point where I'll say, then I'll disconnect and you'll still be my slave. And now that we have no connection and you're my slave, I'm a mean master. And I won't even care about being sympathetic or empathetic. I'll be mean and it won't matter to me. And so understand that the solution will be necessary in the understanding.